On today's episode, a man gets his car crushed for skipping on his bills. And then a man wrongfully gets fired from his job, destroys the company, and then is begged to come back. Which he does, but only under his vengeful circumstances. I hope you guys enjoy these stories. Let's get right into it. Man gets his car crushed by not paying his repair bill. Not my story, but my father's. Took place in the early 2000s. He's a master mechanic who can literally work on any car, foreign or domestic. He's teaching me right now, and it's an honor to learn from him. He's always run his own independent repair shop, almost as long as I can remember. And he's told me a story recently that just seems perfect for this sub. So this guy comes in with a pretty nice Chrysler convertible to get his transmission fixed. He has to remove the transmission, disassemble and rebuild it. Pretty long process, but it's no problem. After a day's work, he calls the customer up, says his car is ready, and reminds him of the agreed upon price of $1,200. The guy said he can only pay $600 then, and he'd have to get back to him on the rest. Now this isn't out of the ordinary. Where we live, most people aren't exactly wealthy. And my dad's a nice guy. He's single-handedly supported 4 kids and a wife, so we weren't exactly rich. It's not uncommon for people to pay in installments. He doesn't charge interest or fees or anything, just tries to do what's right. The guy pays half of his bill, and with the promise of paying the remaining amount in a few weeks, he leaves with his car. About 2 months pass, however, and the guy hasn't paid. Hasn't even contacted my dad about any issues or to say something like he lost his job or something. So my dad calls him up and asks him when he thinks he'll be able to pay the rest of the bill. And I kid you not, this is how the conversation went. "Hey, this is mechanic shop. I was wondering when you'll be able to pay the rest of your bill." "Oh yeah, about that. I'm not paying it." "What? Is something wrong with the car?" "If something went wrong, I'll take care of it." No, the car runs great. I'm just not gonna pay you." "What? Why?" "Well, I have the car now, so I don't see any reason to pay you." They went back and forth for a bit before my dad realized it was pointless and decided to enact some sweet revenge. He calls up a local towing company and gives them the guy's address, license plate and car description, and tells them to tow the vehicle to the county recycling center. He then calls up the recycling center and says, "Hey, you're going to be getting a Chrysler convertible, license plate XX, from blank towing. When it gets there, I want you guys to crush it and recycle it." And so they do! Car was crushed and recycled. The next day, the guy shows up to my dad's business, furious, and with the state patrol. My dad explains the entire story, and the cops tell the guy that technically the vehicle was moved, not stolen. The recycling center received recyclable goods, and not stolen property. And now the car no longer exists, as it's been recycled, and thus was not a criminal matter, but a civil one. So the guy sues my dad, and once again my dad explains the entire story. And amazingly, the judge says the same thing as the trooper said, and dismissed the case. It sounds almost unbelievable, because it just seems so illegal. But if a judge rules in his favor, it's gotta have some merit behind the technicality or something. Granted, this was maybe 15 years ago, so the laws could have changed since. But hot damn, the guy gets his car crushed simply because he chose to not pay the remaining repair bill and wanted to take advantage of someone's kindness. Let's move on to the next story, coming in from r/ProRevenge. Fired? Are you sure? Okay. Note 1. This story was told to me by a friend and is about her father. I won't be able to answer many follow-up questions. It takes place around 2005. I believe the story to be true, but can't verify it, of course. Note 2. This happened in Sweden, where there's a no at-will employment. Once an employee is past their initial 6-month probation period, you can't fire them without a cause, which also requires an established paper trail. So my friend's father, since retired, was a mechanical engineer. He was around 55 when this happened, and very experienced in his field. In fact, he had some skill sets that were close to unique, to the extent that you might be able to replicate them, but at extreme costs. We're talking multiple people from multiple companies from multiple countries taking weeks, if not months, to get up to the speed with specific projects to do the same things. He was also a no bullshit kind of guy who did his job, did it well, but also pointed out problems and expected others to point out problems to him. He was extremely solution oriented and had no time for office politics or keeping a positive attitude at work. Basically your everyday grumpy older engineer who really knew his thing and always ready to help if asked, but not very forthcoming in team building exercises and so on. He also ran his own business on the side, doing minor projects and so on. As was required by his employer, he had reported this and was sure to not cause any conflicts of interest, so his employer knew and accepted this. He was considered a valuable employee and got several awards that he cared little for, but anyway, during his many years with this employer. By all accounts, they paid him well, respected his knowledge, and accommodated to his style, and he returned the favor by working very hard and making sure to mentor younger and newly employed engineers to make them effective coworkers. Then his firm was acquired by a larger firm and a new management team installed. Initially, everyone was promised that things would remain the same, but with the new management came a new office culture. The new management pressured for unpaid overtime, for a more American corporate culture, with cheering and clapping and so on. He considered it extremely cringe and refused to participate. His status as a long-standing and knowledgeable employee kept him safe for some time, before the new management realized that resistance to the new culture centered around him and started pressuring him to play along. When he did not, they turned increasingly hostile, realizing that he held a lot of soft power in the company, having mentored a large percentage of the engineers, and resistance to their leadership centered around him. They started ordering him to work overtime. He answered that he was on time with his projects, and that if they had identified an emergency requiring overtime, they would have to bring it up with the union to negotiate overtime and make sure it was an actual emergency. The contract with the union said no overtime unless an emergency. They tried to force him to participate in the cheering and clapping by making it mandatory for him to attend and yelling at him to participate, and he did, but so unenthusiastically that the event turned even more cringe, and people started laughing. The workday turned more and more hostile, and he knew that things would come to a head sooner or later. Being an experienced engineer and knowing how to document things, he already had his ducks in a row. When it finally happened, they caught him answering an email for his side business on his work laptop, brought him in, and fired him on the spot for theft of company resources. He sat at the conference table and looked at the three managers in their eyes, one after the other, and said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" They all said yes. "Are you really sure you want to do this?" He was escorted to his desk by security and told to leave his phone, his badge, and his computer at the desk, and then escorted out. Once out of the building, he phoned his union representative, who immediately canceled the firing, claimed there was no just cause, which meant that it would go to the labor board for arbitration. You see, the company had an IT policy that it was okay to use the company laptop for personal business, including a side business, as long as you were on a break and compliant with the IT security protocols. And the company was aware of it and had approved his side business. And he was on break. Of course, he had his declaration of a side business, signed by his former manager, and the IT policy available, and sent both to the union representative. He then called his lawyer and asked them to send a pre-prepared cease and desist on 2 patents he held. Patents that were not that significant, and nothing he could make any serious money out of, since they were mostly for very specific things used by the solutions he designed and used at his employers. But still his, that he had brought with him into employment and allowed the employer to use in exchange for a slightly higher pay. All duly documented in his contract, of course. Then he went home for some vacation and tending to his side business. He was always a man to prepare and had enough money saved up to last him for a good time, to the extent that he considered retiring entirely. My friend said that he had 2 job offers from competitors that had looked into sniping him for some time within the week, basically as soon as they learned he was available. He was gracious, but declined, but offered them to consult with his side business now that he had the time, which they eagerly accepted, at twice the hourly rate he made at his earlier employers. His colleagues started ringing the day after for advice, since the projects he had managed could not go on without him. He was perfectly polite, but denied any information and help, saying he had left everything he had with management and to contact them, as he was no longer employed there. Several clients that phoned his private number were told the same thing. Since his private number was not on a public registry, he suspected that both colleagues and clients spent some time and/or money to find it. It took 2 weeks before a manager phoned him and asked things. He politely declined to answer, got yelled at, and replied with something like, "I'm sorry, you must have mistaken me for someone who works for you," and hung up. This happened a few times, and the next week HR phoned him and stated that the firing had been a mistake, and he was welcome back to his job. He again politely declined, saying that he's waiting for the labor board's decision. But until then, he was happy to consult for them at 6 times his hourly pay, after taxes and administrative costs, of course. After a few days of wrangling and trying to negotiate, they had to accept. And then he sprung the patent issue on them, forcing them to pay for those too. Less than 2.5 weeks after being fired, he was back at his desk. After roughly 3 months, the firing came to the labor board. The employers stated that they believed they had handled the issue correctly, but were still willing to offer my friend's father his position back, in the interest of goodwill and reconciliation. My friend's father and the union simply stated that he was now employed elsewhere in his own company and no longer available. The labor board ruled in my friend's father and the union's favor, and he got the normal damages, 3 months pay damage, and 24 months pay severance package, including pension and of course the lawyer costs of the union paid by the employer. According to my friend, her father continued to work there until he retired, working 20 or so hours per week, and 10 to 15 hours for other companies, making a pretty penny, continuing to charge them 3 times what he charged their competitors as an a-hole tax. The managers were not fired, but they were moved into their own group, apart from the rest of the department, when it came to the bonus calculations and the cost of her father's consultancy fees and the cost of the labor board arbitration. Those were added to the budget, meaning that they were constantly over budget and thus ineligible for bonuses for several years, which was a decent percentage of the incentives at the company, making at least one of them quit. My friend also said her father usually met any management complaints with a big shit-eating grin and what are you gonna do, fire me after that? That was a pretty good story, but that brings us to the end of today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed these stories. I look forward to reading some more to you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.